Have you ever wondered why certain stories in the Bible are whispered rather than preached? Why some names seem to vanish in the silence between verses as if carrying a secret too heavy for the pulpit to hold? One of those names is Tamar, a woman buried in the pages of Genesis, a story that unsettles the comfortable, that questions the powerful, and reveals a God who works through the broken. Tonight, we will open that silence, that we will walk the dust of Canaan. We will feel her pain, her courage, her defiance. And when the truth unfolds, you'll understand why heaven never forgot her name. The story begins more than 3,800 years ago. The sun beats down on a young woman walking alone through a barren land. Her name, Tamar. Her name means palm tree, a symbol of life that bends but never breaks. And like that tree, Tamar will stand tall through winds meant to destroy her. She was married to Er, the son of Judah, one of Jacob's 12 sons, ancestor of the tribe that would one day bear the Messiah. At first, her life seemed destined for peace, a marriage in a respected family, a future with promise. But behind the tents of celebration, destiny was already stirring. Scripture says, Er was wicked in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord put him to death. Genesis 38 verse 7. Just like that, Tamar became a widowed, child. No inheritance in that world. A childless widow was considered cursed, forgotten. But the law of her people, the law of Levite marriage, offered a hope. The brother of the deceased must marry the widow to carry on the family name. Judah, her father-in-law, promised her his second son, Onan. But Onan, too, refused to honor the law. He wanted the pleasure without the promise, and the Lord struck him down. 2 brothers gone, a young woman left in ashes. Judah looked at her with fear now. In his eyes, she was cursed. He sent her away. Return to your father's house, he said, until my youngest son grows up. Tamar obeyed. She waited. Days became months, months became years, but Judah never called for her again. Can you feel that silence? The crushing quiet when a promise dies? Every wedding feast she heard from a distance. Every child's laughter echoing through her village reminded her of what she had been denied. Injustice had a face, and it looked like Judah's. But here's the thing about divine stories. When human promises break, God still writes. Years later, Judah's wife died. He mourned for a time, then traveled to Timnah to shear his sheep, and word reached Tamar. The man who had stolen her destiny was passing by, and something inside her, faith, fury, maybe both, awoke that if no one would fight for her justice, she would. Tamar took off her widow's garments, symbols of sorrow, and covered her face with a veil. She positioned herself at the crossroads on the way to Timnah. The sun was setting. A stranger approached. He didn't recognize her. He thought she was a prostitute. It was Judah, the same man who had denied her justice now, desired her in disguise. Tamar's plan was bold, dangerous. If discovered, she would die. But her courage burned brighter than her fear. Judah offered payment, a young goat. Tamar asked for a pledge until it arrived. His seal, his cord, and his staff, the symbols of his identity. He agreed, and that night, the seed of redemption was sown. 3 months later, Tamar's belly began to swell, and the whispers began to spread. Judah's daughter-in-law has played the harlot. She is pregnant. Judah's reaction, rage, self-righteous, hypocritical rage. Bring her out, he commanded, and let her be burned. Genesis 38 verse 24. The crowd gathered. Tamar was brought forth, veiled, trembling, yet resolute. She held something in her hands, the seal, the cord, the staff, and she spoke softly, by the man to whom these belong. I am with child. Judah froze, his breath caught. The truth pierced through the shame. He whispered, she is more righteous than I. And in that moment, everything changed. The woman condemned was vindicated. The forgotten name was restored, and heaven smiled. But that's only the beginning, because what Tamar carried inside her wasn't just proof of innocence. It was the beginning of a divine bloodline. Stay with me. In the next part of this story, you'll discover how this act of courage would echo through generations, all the way to Bethlehem. Judah's words hung heavy in the air. She is more righteous than I. Those were not just words of guilt. They were a confession before heaven that a powerful man stripped of pride, a forgotten woman clothed in divine justice. Tamar had no army, no wealth, no allies. Her only weapon was courage, her only defense truth. And that was enough for God. In a world where women's voices were silenced, Tamar's voice broke through the centuries. She didn't shout, she didn't curse. She simply revealed the truth. And when the truth was revealed, even the powerful bowed their heads. Tamar's life had been marked by injustice, but heaven saw her differently. She was not cursed, she was chosen. Because in God's plan, redemption often begins in the places a world calls disgrace. Months later, her time came. Tamar gave birth to twins, Perez and Zerah. A light flickered in the darkness of her past. What had begun as a scandal was now the beginning of salvation. When the first child's hand appeared, the midwife tied a scarlet thread around it, saying, "This one came out first." But then, Perez broke through a head, that a symbol of breakthrough, of unexpected destiny. Perez's name means the one who breaks out. And indeed, through him, God was breaking out of the boundaries of tradition and human judgment. But what does this mean for us today? Why would God allow such a controversial story to be written in his holy word? Because Tamar's story is not just about one woman, but it's about every person who has ever been wronged, overlooked, abandoned, or misunderstood. It's about divine justice that doesn't follow human logic. Tamar teaches us that God's justice does not always arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a single act of courage. When the system failed her, when the promise was broken, when society labeled her as unworthy, she stood up, not to destroy, but to restore what was lost. Her story whispers a truth that echoes through every generation. When men forget you, God remembers. Imagine the lonely nights Tamar spent waiting, the silent prayers whispered into the desert wind. How many times must she have asked, "Why me, Lord? Why this pain?" Yet through that pain, a greater purpose was unfolding. Sometimes, God doesn't remove the suffering immediately. He transforms it into something eternal. And this is where we begin to see divine poetry of redemption. The woman Judah wanted to burn became the flame that would light the path to the Messiah. From Tamar's womb came Perez, from Perez came Hezron, from Hezron came Ram, and generations later came Boaz, the husband of Ruth, and from that same lineage, King David, and ultimately Jesus Christ. The woman once branded as a harlot became a cornerstone in the lineage of salvation. God did not erase her story, that he magnified it. Do you see the pattern? God doesn't just redeem lives, he redeems legacies. The same God who restored Tamar can restore the broken places in your life. He can take the moments of shame and turn them into testimonies of grace. You may feel forgotten. You may feel abandoned. You may feel that the promises made to you have been buried and forgotten. But Tamar's story whispers, wait, God is still writing. The silence of years does not mean he is absent. It means he is preparing something greater. When Tamar stood at that crossroads, she didn't know she was standing at the intersection of history and prophecy. She thought she was fighting for her dignity. In reality, she was protecting the very lineage that would bring salvation to the world. That's how God works, that he hides eternity in ordinary moments. And here's the mystery. God could have chosen Anianito to continue the line of Judah, but he chose Tamar, a rejected widow, a woman with a controversial past. Because grace is not afraid of scandal, that it's not intimidated by imperfection. Grace steps into the mess and turns it into a masterpiece. This is why Tamar's story matters, because her courage brought divine order out of human failure. Every time someone reads the genealogy of Jesus, Tamar's name appears, a permanent reminder that no one is too forgotten for God to use. Her legacy declares, what men reject, God redeems. And now, we arrive at the revelation that ties her story to yours. In the next part, you'll discover how Tamar's courage still speaks into our lives today. Her story didn't end with redemption. It became a prophecy of grace for every soul who has ever felt unworthy. Generations passed. Empires rose and fell. Names that once commanded nations vanished like dust. But one name, Tamar, remained written in God's story. Her courage was not forgotten. It was recorded, not in gossip or rumor, but in the very bloodline of redemption. Centuries later, a humble carpenter named Joseph would trace his lineage back through Judah, through Perez, and find the name of a woman the world once tried to erase. Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. No edits, no apologies. God left her name there on purpose, a divine reminder that grace never hides the redeemed. You see, the Bible could have skipped her story, that it could have moved on from the shame, the scandal, the pain, but God chose to highlight it. Because what the world calls unworthy, He calls essential. When God builds His story, He doesn't look for the flawless, that He looks for the faithful. And Tamar was faithful. She didn't know that her act of courage would echo through eternity, that one day her descendants would hang on a cross outside Jerusalem, redeeming not just her bloodline, but every broken life on earth. Can you see it now? The pattern of grace woven through generations? Tamar stood in the shadow of injustice, and God turned her shadow into a doorway of light. Maybe today, you feel forgotten like Tamar. Maybe you've been misjudged, your name whispered in rooms you never entered, your heart bruised by promises that were never kept. But hear this truth: God still writes with broken pens. He still builds with rejected stones, that He still redeems the stories that others would rather hide. You are not disqualified by your past. You are positioned by His purpose. Tamar's courage teaches us three unshakable truths. First, when human justice fails, divine justice begins. An act of cruelty escapes the eyes of heaven. Second, courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing faith in the midst of fear. Third, God can turn your most painful chapter into the foundation of His greatest work. From Tamar came Perez, from Perez came David, from David came Jesus, the one who broke every curse, the true redeemer of every forgotten soul. Her story began with loss, but it ended with legacy. And that's the same promise offered to you. If Tamar could speak today, she might whisper, "Do not give up when the world calls you unworthy, because the author of grace is not done writing." Her ashes became a crown. Her disgrace became divine destiny. Her silence became a song that still echoes in every heart that dares to believe that God remembers the forgotten. Maybe that's why the story of Tamar was hidden for so long. Because the truth she carries is too powerful for complacent hearts. She reminds us that redemption isn't polished. It's messy, it's written in tears, in courage, in faith that refuses to die. So the next time you read the genealogy of Jesus, and your eyes glance past that one small line, remember the woman behind it. Tamar, a widow, a warrior, a vessel of redemption. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Bible Characters Stories Explained. Together, we'll uncover the voices the world tried to silence. The hidden stories that reveal just how far God's mercy can reach. Leave a comment. Tell us what part of Tamar's journey spoke to your soul the most. And remember, for God, there are no disposable people. Only lives waiting to discover their extraordinary purpose. I'm your storyteller, and this was Tamar, the woman the church forgot, from shame to destiny. Subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories on the Bible characters.